Well, hello there. You are watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time to see what's making the headlines with the political editors of The Guardian and The Sun, Pippa Crerar and Harry Cole. Welcome and great to see both of you. So, as ever, let's take a look at the front pages, shall we? Starting with the Metro, their headline, Judge raps absent Harry as the Duke of Sussex is admonished for not turning up for the first day of his phone hacking case against Mirror Group newspapers. The Guardian suggests a counter-offensive could be getting underway in Ukraine. The Financial Times has news of a major cyber attack, which is thought to have compromised the personal details of staff at British Airways, Boots and the BBC. The Times has an AI expert warning 2 years to save the world from bioweapons and cyber attacks. According to the Eye, families who lost loved ones to COVID are angry that the inquiry into how the NHS handled the pandemic is to be delayed until after the next election. The Daily Mail claims Labour's green policies could cost families an extra £1,000 a year. The Daily Mirror continues its campaign against dangerous dogs with a direct plea to the Prime Minister. The Express quotes Rishi Sunak, who says more barges will help deter migrant crossings. The Star, though, criticises him for taking a 74-mile trip to Kent in a helicopter to announce those anti-migration measures. Well, a reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you listen to our guests. So let's head straight to them, Pippa Crerar and Harry Cole. And Harry, should we kick off with The Guardian then? Ukraine troops intensify their front line. We've heard from President Zelensky, says more news to come soon. But of course, we've been asked by the Ukrainian military for everyone to keep quiet. So it's getting even harder to work out what's happening on the front line.
Yeah, as spring turned into summer, the sort of long-awaited spring offensive does appear to be, if not beginning, but very close. There's lots of activity going on. And I think probably the biggest sign of something happening is the Russians have been very noisy. The Kremlin are making all sorts of wild claims that they've blown up various tanks and captured and killed Ukrainian soldiers, completely unverifiable sort of propaganda being pumped out of the Kremlin, which would suggest that if it hasn't started already, then it is they are seeing troops amassing and they're expecting it to happen imminently. So things are going on. The fog of war will that takes a long time to become clear, but I think we can take it that the spring offensive, the summer offensive as it is now, is underway, if not imminent.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be absolutely fascinating to see what happens. You know, suggestions today that possibly the Leopard 2 had been out in action, then that was disputed. But what will be fascinating to see is whether the Western training and the Western heavy weaponry, Pippa, will make a material difference to what's been basically a stagnant war over the winter.
Yes, and there's 12 Ukrainian brigades which have benefited from Western training and equipment, and none of those have apparently been spotted out on manoeuvres so far. So suggesting, as Harry says, that it's the preliminary stages to the counter-offensive, which we've all heard so much about, rather than the offensive itself, although obviously very difficult to tell, and I think we're unlikely to get that verified by the Ukrainians. It's going to be something anyway that individual reporters on the ground and independent bodies will have to make their assessment of when that gets underway. And it's a very it's a very pivotal moment, really, isn't it? Because if this counteroffensive ends up being successful, if it ends up liberating some of the territory which Russia took in Ukraine, and if it ends up pushing the Russians back and sort of them ending up on the run, then it raises hopes of an earlier end to hostilities than might otherwise have taken place. The flip of that, of course, is that if that counteroffensive ends in failure, then it really is condemning Ukraine to a grim and grueling, protracted struggle against Russia. And inevitably with that will come intensified pressure from overseas to cede territory, which is obviously the last thing that Zelensky wants to do. But we're some way off all of that just now. We're just at the preliminary stages, so that the coming weeks as we go into summer are going to be really, for all of us sitting watching what's going to what's going down on the ground, are going to be absolutely crucial in determining not just the short term but the longer term future of this conflict.
Yes, and in his nightly address, President Zelensky praised two specific brigades and said that they had skillfully, decisively and efficiently defended our positions, destroying the occupiers and, most importantly, moving forward. A suggestion there that they are now taking offensive action, even if this is not the counteroffensive which everyone has been talking about. Let's move to the Express, shall we? And obviously the words we heard of Rishi Sunak today, more barges. That's the solution, is it, Harry? Daily Express thinks so?
The solution may be, I mean, Rishi Sunak was out today in Dover looking, put his little life jacket on and went on a boat and pointed at some things. Government are pleased that the numbers are down 20% on last year. Nigel Farage very quickly popped up to point out that it's actually been very windy and we had the wettest March on record in March, obviously. And actually the weather's been pretty terrible this year so far, so that could have had an impact on the crossings. Either way, Rishi Sunak has pledged to stop the boats, very broad term, by next Christmas, by this Christmas. If he's only 20% down in 6 months, he's obviously going to miss that target. They are quite pleased, however, ministers are pleased with the sort of number of Albanians who've been crossing over since Rishi Sunak signed a sort of deterrent scheme that meant that Albanians will be sort of transferred back to Albania almost immediately after landing here. However, only 1,800 of them have actually been deported so far. So I think there's more of a sort of holding position, really, for the government today. They've announced a few more barges. The first barge, which will host 500 migrants, isn't actually even up and running yet, but they've signed contracts, I think, with 2 more. Really, I think we're in a sort of holding pattern on migration until the Court of Appeal come back later this month, as expected, on Rwanda. And then I think we'll see, either heads to the Supreme Court, or there's a possibility that flights could get going later this year. So I think that's more of a sort of halfway house for the government rather than anything really tangible today.
Yeah, some more facts and figures from him, confirming what we already knew. 172,000 people are still waiting in this enormous backlog. That's up 57% from a year earlier, the highest figure since comparable records began in 2010, but down 17,000, and praising the fact that, some 1,800 Albanians had been sent back home. Doesn't actually seem a lot, does it, Pippa?
No, and I mean, I think the figures, I think quite a helpful way of looking at them in terms of how long it would take to get down the backlog, which is obviously, ultimately key to dealing with this asylum processing backlog, is key to Rishi Sunak delivering on his promise to stop the boats. Obviously, if you can process people faster, move them on, return them, or give them or grant them asylum, then he could go some way to saying that he's delivered on that pledge. And the figures that I find quite useful to look at are that last month there was 2,500 decisions made on legacy backlog, asylum backlog cases. That's 1,000 fewer than the month before. But the Refugee Council says that 10,500, so not the 2,500 we've had, but 10,500 would need to be made a month for Sunak to deliver on that pledge. That's a fivefold increase on where they are at the moment. There's real problems. Obviously, there's been some attempts to appoint more officials to speed up the processing, but it's not just about the system itself. It's about where people end up, and that's of course comes back to the barges and the large vessels, which Sunak confirmed there'd be 2 more. Today, our understanding at the Guardian is that one of them is going to be in Teesside and one is going to be in docks near Liverpool. It's going to be a cruise ship rather than a barge, and also discussions are going on with 4 other ports across the UK: Newcastle, Harwich, Felixstowe and Royal London docks, for vessels to be moored at those sites as well. But those discussions are just at the early stages, and nothing has been signed yet, even on the Liverpool and Teesside ones. So there's no sign of that happening anytime soon. And all the while, the clock ticks down to the deadline for Rishi Sunak to have delivered on his pledge.
Yes, and the Conservative MP Richard Drax, pushing back on on the barge, near his constituency, suggesting that it's going to be into force within a fortnight, worrying about the free time people are getting, how sanitary it is, how many people will be put into, what are they, cabins? Are they cells? Who knows on these vessels? The Times, they're reporting that French are now stopping half of the boat migrants after this nearly £500 million deal, Harry. So just talk us through the latest on those two elements.
Yeah, so there was obviously a feeling of, it's kind of disquiet in the Home Office and Border Force that the French weren't really taking this seriously. Obviously, they've got their own migration problems on their southern border, their land borders as well with the rest of Europe. And obviously, Sunak came under some heat too when he signed yet another big check to France to say, look, come on, there's going to be joint patrols and joint intelligence sharing and drones and all this snazziness on the French beaches, but it does appear perhaps to be working. So yeah, slightly more migrants were sort of stopped from launching on the French northern coast than have reached the UK so far this year. If that holds up, I wonder how long it will be before Paris comes asking for a bit more dosh.
Meantime, the Daily Star picking up on the fact that it was a helicopter trip for the 74-mile journey to Dover for the PM, Pippa.
Yes, an hour-long journey by train. Although I was tweeting about this earlier, and some people were suggesting that if anybody had to rely on the train services to the south of England, they might understand why he'd used a helicopter. However, more seriously, it again raises questions about whether he is, in touch with the rest of us. I can't think of a prime minister that used for official business on taxpayer-funded visits a helicopter as much as Rishi Sunak seems to have done in the last few months. Every other week, he's landing on in Southampton, in other parts of the UK, other parts of England, travelling via helicopter. And Number 10 argue that it's about making the most of the Prime Minister's time. Well, I managed to work on trains. 99.999% of the rest of the country managed to work on trains. I'm not convinced necessarily that an hour-long trip by train is something that he can justifiably avoid by taking a helicopter instead, which I'm afraid just really gives ammunition to his enemies, who suggest that he's out of touch and he's too used to sort of a rich, a wealthy lifestyle that's Harry or myself or any of our readers wouldn't be able to emulate. And Harry's there shaking his head. He's probably going to tell us that it should be prime minister's prerogative to take any form of transport he wants, even if it's like champagne-fueled private jet flights.
This is such a bubble story. It's so tedious. The public do not care. They've actually it's like such sort of backward Little Britain sort of skepticism. Look at the way that every other European leader travels around. Look at the way the American president travels around. Look at their entourages. We sort of had this sort of hair shirt. Ridiculous.
I'll remind you of that when Prime Minister Keir Starmer is travelling.
Hang on, Pippa, Harry. I actually just Googled something, and I'm going to read you something from May 15th, 2007, in the Daily Express, written by Mesa Hall, our former colleague, and it says Blair swans around in helicopter. Prime Minister spent £50,000 travelling in a Royal Navy Merlin helicopter to visit 3 schools. This isn't new, and it's just so tedious. And you know what? I'd like to see Keir Starmer flying around on a helicopter, because that's what prime ministers do.
OK. I feel a poll coming on, don't you? Anyway, both of you stay there. Lots more to fit into the next part of our programme, including Prince Harry being admonished today for not turning up to the opening day of his phone hacking trial. We will discuss that and more after the break. Well, welcome back. You are watching the press preview with me now, Pippa Crerar and Harry Cole, to discuss more of the papers for, she checks the date, Tuesday, I think. I can never work it out. Anyway, let's go to the Metro and a number of other newspapers, obviously, Pippa, that are leading on Prince Harry's appearance in court. It will be on Tuesday. And the first time Rolls appeared as a claimant. So a very interesting day at the High Court ahead for all of us.
Yes, and we were expecting initially Prince Harry to be in court today, but he took the decision to be to stay in California for his daughter's second birthday and to travel out on Sunday, overnight on Sunday, was apparently still suffering from jet lag today, so didn't appear in court. And was admonished by the judge. And, it strikes me that given that this is a civil court where there is no jury to appeal to, it isn't necessarily the wisest of decisions to annoy the one person who's going to be making a ruling in your case. But it's going to be an interesting day when it finally, an interesting time when it finally happens. Because Harry will, of course, be the first royal since 1891, when Edward VI was interviewed about was being interviewed in court about alleged cheating in a card game. Certainly these days we have a lot more. There's going to be a lot more cameras and journalists and TV crews and all the rest of it. It's going to be a major royal and news event. So I think we'll be hearing plenty about it in the next 24 hours as Harry tries to bring his claim against the Mirror Group newspapers, and they in turn try to cast doubt on his evidence and his motives for bringing the case. So we've got all that ahead.
Yes, and ploughing through all the different articles that he says were obtained by illegal means. I think originally it was more than 100. It's been honed down to 33, of which 12 discuss his relationship with Chelsea Davy. The suggestion has been made by his team, that effectively broke up their relationship. And this is all about the damage that is done, as people worry about, who's been giving information about them. And The Guardian, amongst other papers, pointing out that the phone of Diana, Princess of Wales, was allegedly hacked to try to obtain details about her secret meetings with Michael Barrymore. So it looks like he'll bring in his mother as well into this, Harry. But, the whole point is the importance for him of having his day in court, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the way these things work is he gets to say a huge amount of things, ahead of the trial, submitted to the trial that, get thrown out there without any sort of scrutiny. We're now going to see the other side of this argument, and it's going to be interesting for Harry, I think. And as Pippa pointed out, you don't really annoy the one person that's going to be making these decisions and winding up the judge on day one. Not a great start. But all the time we've heard from Harry in the last year or 2 years or so, it's been soft soap interviews with Tom Bradbury, soft soap interviews with Oprah. The puff piece book ghostwritten by someone else, the Netflix completely unchallenging, witterings from the pair of them without anyone actually fighting back and actually arguing an alternative view. So I wonder whether actually, this is the wisest course of action for Harry, and whether he realizes actually that it's not just going to be the Harry show. He can't just swan in from LA on his jet whenever he wants to and turn up when he feels like it. He's taken this course of action, and he's going to have to defend, what he's alleged. So it's going to be, I suspect, quite spicy.
OK, yep, full coverage, obviously. Now, to the Times, the most sobering story possibly that we have here. The news that AI systems will be powerful enough to kill many humans within, wait for it, 2 years. This is Rishi Sunak's advisor on artificial intelligence. Yes, Pippa.
Right, well, I'm not professing to be an expert on artificial intelligence here, but I have to say, if we all end up getting taken out by computers in 2 years' time, then, well, maybe I shouldn't dismiss it. It just seems a bit overstated to me. I know that there's a huge amount of concern in Whitehall and government at the moment that we don't necessarily have the legislation or the tools generally to equip us to control, to limit, to restrain artificial intelligence, and that we are playing a bit of a catch-up game with all of that. But the focus is very much on it now. And I think actually that our biggest concern when it comes to AI in the short term, and maybe longer term, there are going to be problems with bioweapons and cyber attack threats from AI. But I think our biggest issue in the short term is one of disinformation. And I think we're likely to see that in particularly the elections in the United States next year. We're already seeing AI being used to create videos and information which is being shared. And even if those individuals, even if it's they're made aware that those particular items are not, are artificial and have been generated by computers rather than capturing what's really going on, they nevertheless become a talking point.
Yeah, apologies to step in there. Run out of time.